It is a beautiful fall in the Lowcountry of South Carolina. Today, we're going to give you the market update through September. Some pretty interesting statistics, actually, because September was a big month. And then we're going to get after one of the biggest risky business components of looking at value in real estate. So let's get after it. Coming to you here in the fall, it finally feels like fall in the Lowcountry. It is October, and we're going to come to you with the latest data through the end of September in terms of what's been happening on the market, and also talk about one of the biggest pitfalls that has to do with valuation of property. So let's look at the data. Okay, through the end of September, September was a big month. Had a bunch of new listings. There was 31% increase in the number of new listings that came on the market in September compared to September of last year. 51% increase in the number of pending sales in September. Let that soak in. Another half over of what we saw in September of last year. Closings were up 10%, which is, again, speaking to the trending, what's sort of been happening this year. Average days on market also went up. So we saw that year to date is actually 85 days for the market area. So pushing towards 3 months average days on market. An indication, like we've been talking about, the market has a lot more inventory, moving a little bit more slowly. Buyers are taking their time. They've got the opportunity to do that. Average sales price to list price ratio, so sellers and buyers negotiating, that dropped down just a little bit. It's about 97% right now. And just looking at year to date for our market area, we're right at $800,000 for the average sales price of property that's closed throughout the course of 2025. So it's a busy fall, right? Yeah. It's been a busy fall. And we just want to take a couple of minutes today just to address one of the things I guess we feel like we see with buyers and sellers that come at us in our group and probably to other realtors is, well, I'm looking at this home and I'm looking at my home, or I'm looking at this market and the average price per square foot is X. And right, I know you can fall back on it, which is, data, as you say, data is good. That's data. It's easy data to get to. It's an interesting metric to get to. It's easy to calculate as long as the data is correct, by the way. Square footage is not always correct sometimes. But I think the challenge is that you could do that on a specific piece of property and say, okay, the price of this house that just sold per square foot is X. You can do that. But then translating that to the next property and the next property and the next property is where it gets slippery.
And dangerous.
And dangerous because you could miss the mark.
You could.
Right? Tell me about that analogy. You were talking about that analogy about a compass and a map, and sort of how does this relate to that? Like how is that the compass and then what's the map in terms of figuring out the direction?
Well, price per square foot, in my opinion, is a shortcut. It's not a valuation. Okay. Especially with residential real estate.
Right.
Okay. In a market like this. And if you look at price per square foot, it is data, and data is good. I love data. I keep data. I collect data. I analyze data, all that stuff. So it's good. Data is good.
Yeah.
But it's like price per square foot is maybe the compass heading.
Yeah.
But you're missing the map.
So you don't really know where you are on the map.
Right. It gives you an idea of what's going on to some degree, depending on how good the data is coming into it, but you don't have the map. So it's just, I don't know, it's not value, in my opinion, it's math.
Sure. Yeah. And that makes sense. And, it's sort of like we've talked about through the years, and we're not kicking on Zillow. People use Zillow all the time. It's great. But you look at the Zestimate, it can never be right? Because all it's doing is just crunching that data. And the data may be accumulated in a massive way, much more than just price per square foot, but it fails to consider sort of that map. And the map is sort of more of that qualitative evaluation. So let's run through, if someone's saying, well, okay, if price per square foot is flawed, why is it flawed? What is it failing to take into consideration?
Well, it's oversimplified. Okay, sure. It's oversimplified, and it ignores the story behind the property itself.
Sure.
So it does not take into consideration layout. It does not take into consideration land value. I mean, land value can be so different from here to there. It doesn't take into consideration quality of construction. It doesn't take into consideration functional obsolescence. How is the floor plan? I mean, is it when you maybe take a 2,000 square foot house and you have a 2,500 square foot house right next door, the 2,500 square foot house might be worth, less,
Right.
because maybe it's all chopped up and stuff like that. And the smaller house maybe has a better plan.
It's got everything everybody's looking for, right? Plus, it's maybe got updated features. Maybe it has higher end appliances. You talk about land value, and that's the other thing that's really flawed in the equation of price per square foot is if you're really going to get down to the square footage, you better get rid of the land because the land isn't part of that square footage. So what's the view comparison? What's the size of lot comparison? What's the setting comparison? Is that neighborhood hot and selling well, or is it not selling well? So if you're going to run that in that direction, you better remove the land. And that's hard to do because now you're really into qualitative analysis.
Well, land value could be, and typically is in many cases, the biggest component of value.
Sure.
I mean, we just had a sale that happened a couple months ago down at the beach. $2,800 per square foot.
Right. On
the beach.
Right.
Okay.
For the whole product.
So what was the house? The house was a little 2,000 square foot house that was built in the 1970s. It's going to get torn down.
Yeah. And you can't take that price per square foot and say, okay, the house next to it is this brand new house, so it needs to command $2,800.
Right. So the house next to it is a 5,000 square foot house that was built last year.
Right.
Let's multiply 5,000 by $2,800 a foot,
and
let's see where we get.
Right.
Let's value it there.
Yeah, that doesn't work. I was thinking about the analogy. It's like when you go to builders and you say, okay, I own a piece of land. I want to build a house on this piece of land, and we see this as a flaw too. So, Mr. Builder, what is your price per square foot? And they're going to say immediately back to you, well, what do you want in the house? How big is it? Right. What kind of amenities do you want? Do you want an indoor pool? Do you want a bonus room? Do you want all these extra features? What level of finish do you want? They're always going to say we'll get to that calculation at the end.
Right.
But it's not a really good place to start, right?
It's not. And the price per square foot assumes every square foot is equal. So that's not the case. So let's say you have a high-end kitchen that's 300 square feet as a contributory part of the property.
Yeah.
And you have a den or a sitting room upstairs in the corner that's 300 feet.
Right.
They're not equal.
They're not the same value.
Not the same value.
Not just because they didn't cost as much to build, but because maybe, I think certainly the kitchen, being the heart of a lot of homes, is more valuable to a buyer than the den. And that brings up the point of the flawed approach. Even if you felt like you had some comparable properties and then running and say, okay, well, I feel like, it's the same lot, it's the same view, it's the same neighborhood, same age of house, et cetera. And if you said, okay, that's great, you take a price per square foot on a smaller home versus a larger home, you're going to come up with a higher number per square foot on the smaller home because you can't apply it to the value of the higher home because maybe the fifth or sixth bedroom isn't as valuable as those first square feet in the house.
We've heard it time and time again. A neighbor has a bigger home. The smaller home down the street sold for X a square foot.
Yeah.
So the neighbor goes, that one just sold for X a square foot. I've got a bigger home. Let's do the math. Here's my value. This is what I expect the market to do. It's just not going to work.
Yeah.
It's not going to work.
So the approach really needs to be, I think, again, it's good to have the compass, but you got to kind of know where you are on the map. And I like that analogy because the map is really saying, okay, there's other things that need to be considered. Some of which is totally subjective. Where's buyer demand?
Right.
Is this house going to perform really well in the market, or has it been seen that, we talked about like fixer uppers, for instance. A lot of buyers are still not particularly interested in taking on a project. So that's a consideration that could impact the price per square foot.
Right. Well, buyers buy with emotion.
Right.
And they justify with data.
Yeah. Okay.
Price per square foot strips the emotion out of the equation.
Right. But it's flipped.
Yeah, it takes it out of the equation. So a buyer might use that as kind of some sort of, I don't know,
metric or basis,
something like that. But to rely on it independently or make decisions on buying or decisions on selling, I hate to say it, agents do it too.
Yeah.
Agents do it too. If they get some comps sometimes, I'm not saying always, but they get some comps, do the quick math. And price per square foot in your neighborhood is X.
Yeah.
On average.
Right. And then that's why that's a comparative market analysis program, sort of like the Zestimate, is flawed inherently because it fails to take into consideration the other subjective components that a broader vision of what's actually happening in the market and some of the relevant properties may bring into play. Now, it might work, and we've mentioned this before, it might work if you take a developer product, all the homes are built by the same builder at the same time on similar lots, and they're all sort of based on the same model. You start to condense the variables and you start saying, yeah, that might work. Okay, well, this home, well, we went with the option of adding the screen porch. Well, that does add value and we can start to calculate that objectively. But everything else outside of that, custom homes in varied neighborhoods, resale properties, et cetera, it's kind of out the window.
It is. And I appreciate y'all letting us talk to this topic on this video because it is something that comes into our office, into our arena all the time by buyers, sellers, and agents. And I wanted to do something like this to just kind of talk about it. I mean, you can research it all day long and it'll support the things that we're saying. It's just a quick metric to kind of get a quick number, but that number could really steer you in the wrong direction.
Right, and that's the problem, is that you might have a seller that concludes that the house is priced too high or maybe too low. You might have a buyer that gets hung up on that, says, I'm not going an inch higher, and then they lose the house because somebody else saw the real value in it. So we just want folks to be able to make sure you're making good decisions off of a good approach, recognizing there's no perfect, and certainly price per square foot is in that category, not perfect. All right, guys, appreciate your time today. We'll talk to you all again soon.